Congressman joins us. He's one that is well known in these parts, and I think one that we had looked forward to talking with for quite some time. He is Congressman John Rutherford, who represents the 5th District here in North Florida, Jacksonville, and part of St. Johns County. I still believe that's that right, John?
Correct. Yeah, most of St. Johns County.
All right, excellent. Well, he's with us today, and to talk about what's happening is when in his district, in the state, and now that he is a congressman, he gets to talk about things from all around the country. So let's get right to it. Let's start with you. What are the top 3 legislative priorities that you had set for this year, and what you went through last year?
Thank you, Fred. It's great to be with you, and great to see you again. But I will tell you that I think the 3 top issues that we're trying to address this year, number 1 is the economy and energy. And then, of course, number 2 on an international stage is China. That is something that we definitely have to be concerned about. And then third and finally, as a 41-year law enforcement officer, I'm very concerned about law and order and how I see that being addressed across the country, or more importantly, not being addressed across the country. And so those are really the top 3 areas that I'm focused on.
Well, you mentioned law and order, so let's test that. You spent most of the first part of your life, some 40 years, I believe, in law enforcement.
41,
so,
yeah.
What's your concern with law enforcement? It seems to be a major priority among many on both sides of the aisle these days. Not as much talk about defunding the police as had been talked about before. But what's your concern about law and order in this country?
Well, I tell you, Fred, the greatest concern that I have is what I see as a move to nationalize state and local law enforcement. Look, I will tell you that America's domestic security lies in the fact that we have a very diverse law enforcement at the state and local level. And it's incredibly diverse. I mean, we have over 1 million officers. We have over 18,000 law enforcement agencies. And, in the President Biden's executive order back about 10 months ago, executive order 14074, Sections 19 and 20 in that bill, in that executive order, really concerned me, Fred, because it talks about tying all of these strings to federal grants through DOJ. And it's the same elements that they were unable to get passed through the George Floyd Justice Act. And so now to get federal grants, you're going to have to meet these same standards. And so I've got issues with that. This isn't the first time this has happened. In fact, I saw this and complained about this back, and I want to say it was around 2005 when I was sheriff. And my budget people came to me and they said, Sheriff, their DOJ is demanding that we be NIMS compliant to get federal grants. Well, I had no problem with NIMS because JSO was already NIMS compliant. We were 900 level compliant, which is the highest you could have. And NIMS is the National Incident Management System. So that whole process that the city uses to address, hurricanes and other, mass events, we use that all the time. So I didn't have a problem with that. What I had a problem with was the federal government telling me as a sheriff that I have to do X, Y, Z. Otherwise, I can't get my constituents' tax money back to help my community. And I don't like that. And so that's number 1. And then number 2, section 19 of that executive order. And then section 20 of that order actually takes, we're very proud of the fact in Jacksonville that The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is when we first got it, we were one of, I think, 100, not 100, of 31 agencies in the entire country that had what we call the Triple Crown of accreditation. You might remember that. We were accredited by CALEA, the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation. We were commissioned by the American Corrections Association. We were accredited by the NCCHC, which is the National Commission on Corrections Healthcare. And we met hundreds of standards to get that recognition and to really, the importance of these accreditation standards is it tells your constituents that you are using best practices, right? And so we want to make sure that we're using best practices at JSO and other agencies around the country.
Well, JSO has been fortunate in that it hasn't had the kind of relations with the ill-fated relations, I'll say, that has been showing up around the country with other police units. Most recently the issues up in Tennessee, at Nashville, and that kind of thing. We've been fortunate here that we haven't seen that kind of thing going on. But I don't.
And I think these national accreditations really give the community a comfort that we are using best practices and we are trying to do the right thing. But what Section 20 of this executive ordinance does, the president wants to take that nationally recognized accreditation process and roll that up under the U.S. Attorney General's office. And the U.S. Attorney General's office has no business telling us what standards should be or look, we use the subject matter experts in the field to develop these standards. That's who should be, and that's why we go after those accreditations, because we know that is the best practice. I don't want the U.S. Attorney General's office determining what those standards should be. And so that's part of what I'm greatly concerned about.
Now you mentioned, I was going to save this for later, but you've already mentioned it. So let's touch it bases with it now, because these are nationwide issues that you now have to be concerned with. We've got this business with China that is uppermost in everybody's mind. There have been congressional hearings with the CEO of TikTok over the last week that, many congressmen were trying to make sure that he was going to tell them that the government of China did not take any of the personal information of Americans from TikTok. That's one issue among others. But what's your main concern about our relationship with China?
Yeah, well, obviously the issue is the theft of intellectual property. I'm very concerned about that. I'm very concerned that we've created an unlevel playing field when we allowed China to come into the World Trade Organization and we give them a third world status, a developing country status. Think about that, Fred. They get all the breaks of a developing country. They're not a developing country, and that's why this week on the House floor we're going to have a vote. And it's called the China is Not a Developing Nation Act. And we're going to stop giving them these advantages that America doesn't have, Europe doesn't have, but they're not a developing country any longer.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about that. But the problem,
exactly.
the biggest problem I see with our relationship with China, it's almost like our relationship that we had business-wide that we had with Japan back in the early 60s and 70s. Everybody complained about this product must be made in Japan. And yes, it was a lot of electronic stuff. It still is made out in Japan because they were the cheapest place and the most innovative place making a lot of electronic things. That now has switched to China to a great extent. Right. The microprocessors, everything. I know a line of women's shoes that
Well,
is made in China. The company is based in San Francisco, but the shoes are made in China at a shop there, and sent over here and then sold. And people are buying up those shoes by like nobody's business. Many American businesses are dependent upon China to make their products so they can sell them in the U.S. American businesses, and that, to me, is a bigger threat to our economy and our moving forward than anything else. But we're so dependent upon China economically.
Well, here's another thing, Fred, that concerns me is the way we're allowing online purchases to be shipped to America as individual shipments instead of. So if you go online and you buy something from Amazon or some other group that you buy shoes, we'll continue the shoe discussion. You buy shoes out of China, and 500 other people buy shoes out of China, and it's under the de minimis number, which means if it's not at a certain value, they don't pay any tariffs to bring that into the country. And so they treat them as 500 separate sales and not a shipment of 500 shoes, which would not be under the de minimis number, and they would have to pay tariffs on. So they're getting around our tariff system because of these online sales that they're counting as one purchase.
Well, that's true. But I mean, that's what the law allows them to do. And that's what a number of the American business people are certainly taking advantage of that, because they're making so much of their product in China and selling it here. I mean, just about every other thing we turn over, clothes, you look at the label. It used to be, as I said, some Japan. Now you see Vietnam and you see China, almost exclusive.
And that's why we have to look at those import and export laws and rules, and not give China an advantage through the WTO that they've had. And I'll tell you and I would encourage folks, if you want to see the real threat from China, go look at the International Republican, not Republican as Republican, but the International Republican Institute. They published a report on 13 different countries, and it's called "The Malign Chinese Influence and the Corrosion of Democracy." And it's the way you've heard of the Belt Road Initiative, and the way the Chinese are going into these countries and using a concept called elite capture. For example, you see what's going on in Sri Lanka right now. Their government collapsed, and this all goes back to an infrastructure project, several infrastructure projects that China partnered with the country of Sri Lanka to do. They came in, they get them so far in debt, it's called debt capture in this case. They got them so far into debt, they couldn't pay it back. And but the top people in the country didn't care, because guess what? China, these behind the door deals, they made them filthy rich. And so they bought off the elites of the country. And then when they couldn't pay their bill back, China said, well, I tell you what, give us your deep water port, which is the only deep water port that India had access to. They don't have a deep water port. And so all of that trade out of India now goes through Sri Lanka. Well, it was before, but Sri Lanka got the advantage of that. Now China is, and that's why you see the Sri Lankans are like going crazy, because their deep water port has now been captured by the Chinese. And there's 13 other or 12 other countries in that report where they've done that exact same thing. And it's called elite capture, where they go in, they corrupt the top levels of organization, and they don't care, because nobody in the country is going to hear what happened, because they also bring in Huawei to try and control the messaging, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really criminal what they're doing, and we're trying to educate. I spoke at the World Peace Organization, talking about, well, what can we do? And the whole mission of Congress now is to make this process of elite capture known to all of these different small countries that are getting in bed with China but have no idea what's coming. And I give you another great example was Ecuador. They went to Ecuador. They built a hydroelectric plant. What confused me about Ecuador was I couldn't figure out what Ecuador had that China could possibly want. And quite frankly, it wasn't in the book, in the report at that time, because it hadn't happened yet. About a year and a half later, I read a report. And Fred, it was about 160 fishing vessels that were now headed to the Galapagos Islands, and they're going to fish out Ecuador's natural resources. And so and then I'm like, that's why they went to Ecuador.
Yeah,
so those are the kind of issues that we face with China, all around the globe.
Let's go to another side of the globe. Something that has caused some consternation recently, particularly in Congress, about whether to continue to support or not. And that's the issue of Ukraine. I think there seems to be, from what I can gather, there seems to be a pretty solid agreement that we're not going to send any troops over there. But what have you gathered is the feeling, and what is your feeling about what is eventually going to happen to Ukraine, and how much more support we can give them?
Yeah, Fred, that's a great question. And I think people need to understand that this conflict in Ukraine is not just between Russia and Ukraine. It's also by resisting Russia at this point, we are also resisting China. You cannot decouple these two events. And what concerns me is if we were to not fulfill the obligations that we created back in the 94 Budapest Agreement, I believe China would go right into Taiwan. We would lose that semiconducting business there, and that would be catastrophic. And so I think our best move is to make sure that Russia and China do not prevail in Ukraine, and that we send a strong statement to both countries that this type of aggression, whether it's Ukraine or Taiwan, we are not going to stand for it.
Well, that's going to be something to watch. Again, America has strong economic business ties with China, not so much with Russia. So we can kind of afford to do it. And I think that's one of the things that we'll all have to look at as time go on. A few minutes we have left of your precious time here. I see something on your website that says authorizing the use of Emancipation Hall in the Capitol Visitor Center for a ceremony as part of the commemoration of the days of remembrance of victims of the Holocaust. Is that something you sponsored?
Right. Yes. To allow them to use that hall to celebrate the memory of the Holocaust. Yes.
Okay. And a Parents' Bill of Rights Act. What's in that? What's that about?
Yeah, that bill basically allows parents to have a right to be involved in their children's education, to know what's in the curriculum, to see the books, the right to speak up, the right to know if there's been violence within their school. Some of the things that I I was concerned about when I was sheriff, and we had, our school resource officers in our schools. Florida, well, Jacksonville anyway. We haven't had that kind of problem that you saw in Virginia, where they simply moved a rapist from one school to another. That was horrible,
Hmm.
and that's the kind of stuff that we never tolerated in the Duval County public school system. In us working with them. And so those are the kind of things that I think the Parents' Bill of Rights. You as a parent, you have a right to know that these things are occurring in your school.
All right. You have been on the minority side for, I guess, most of the time that you've been in Congress now. But
Yeah.
now you're in the majority. Did you get a bigger office? Yeah. How does it feel to be in the majority side now?
So I'm in the same office. Now we do have better meeting rooms, but
Okay.
no, I'm in my same office. What I like about my office, even though my office is small, my staff space is quite large, and so they love that. And if they love that, I love that. So I'm more concerned about their space than mine, because they're here much more than I am.
All right. Well, that's probably a good thing. They can't accuse you of laying around the office.
Right. Hey, well, listen. Let me give you one more important part. We talked about the economy being a major concern too, and we've got a bill coming up. We're getting ready to vote on HR 1, which is the energy bill, and I can tell you that's going to be very important. This bill will, it impacts on the regulatory process, which is really hurting the energy industry right now. It takes years to get some of these leases, and then it takes years of court battles. And this bill will actually require a 1-year response from the EAP on impact. It'll also assist with some of the permitting from the standpoint of lawsuits. You can't sue on something that you haven't spoken before about at these public hearings. And then, of course, also, it's going to repeal a lot of the extra fees that were built into the IRA, the Inflationary Reduction Act. So this bill is going to help us get back some of our energy independence. Fred, I think that's the most important economic issue that we can tackle here in Congress, is getting our energy independence back, because that goes through every segment of our economy. And I'll tell you, I started to take a picture of it. I filled up, now this is several months back and it's gone down since then, but I filled up my little Camry here and I paid $71 for a tank of gas.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is crazy.
You got incentive sponsors for the bill yet?
Oh yes. In fact, it's going to the floor today, I think, or today or tomorrow. I'm sorry. Tomorrow.
Right. I'm gonna look out for that. That's something to see.
Yeah, that's going to be an important one.
It is, and I think everybody. I don't think anybody would argue about that. That's something we all go with.
We got to get energy prices back to where they were.
Well, we'll never get them back to the quarter they were back in 1971. But
yeah, I remember those days too.
I'll settle for $3 at this point.
Yeah. Hey, Fred, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up too. Another thing that the Florida delegation is trying to do. In the Inflationary Reduction Act, there's a section that opens up windmills and oil rigs off Florida's coast.
Whoa.
Now Florida has already voted, the state of Florida, the state legislature already voted not to allow any of that. The Florida delegation, just know we are all like this fighting to keep that from happening. We're trying to find a way to stop it. And, but you know, we don't need windmills and oil rigs off our coast. That's not good for our economy. Our people don't want it. We know that. And so we're fighting to stop that.
All right. That is something that I think will be of keen interest to everybody. Congressman John Rutherford represents the 5th District here in Florida in the United States Congressman and the United States Congress, House of Representatives, as better known, former sheriff here, law enforcement, and one of the good guys, if I might say, on the other side of the aisle. We'll look forward to extending this conversation, deal with a few more domestic issues the next time we talk, but I do appreciate your time.
Sounds good. Thank you, Fred.